Good morning, everybody. I'm Max Rockefeller with ShopWare and responsible for ProShop sales and implementation, in addition to Markforged 3D printers. Along with myself is Matt Sump, Mastercam subject matter expert and organizer for the webinar. And last but not least, Brian Anderson from ProShop in Western Washington is also with us.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Thanks for joining today. I work with ProShop. I do sales and help along implementation. So when you adopt ProShop, kind of help form what that looks like for your company and execute all the training.
We're going to walk through the webinar agenda here. From there, we're going to look at how that turns into a part in a work order, and Brian Anderson will be helping and explaining our cost breakdown and the modules that follow after that. In front of you is the agenda. Like I said, this should take about 15 minutes, pretty self-explanatory. We'll be touching on everything from how you would work with ShopWare and ProShop for implementation to some of the features and functionalities. A brief history on ProShop. I know a few of you have been on a demo with myself, Brian, or Paul Van Meter in the past, but I think it's worth mentioning for those that we haven't shared this with. ProShop started by a machine shop, 4 gentlemen from Western Washington University up in Bellingham, just north of Seattle, were students and participants in the SAE car program in college. And they decided that starting a machine shop was the best thing for their interests and their specialties. And with a little bit of money, they started in the late 90s. And so complex assemblies, some milling, turning, if you will. And from there, like some of us on the phone or others that we know in the industry, you might start managing your business with Microsoft Excel or other tools. And in front of you is 2 screenshots of how they were managing their business, Pro CNC that is, and back in the late 90s and early 2000s. And at one point in time, they decided that Excel just wasn't going to cut it for them. And you can go a few different routes at that point, right? You can decide to use an ERP software platform that is for general manufacturing. You could continue to use Excel with Access, or potentially hire a software developer and produce a homegrown, custom-tailored solution. And Pro CNC developed what we now call ProShop in the early 2000s to fill a gap that they saw in the marketplace after reviewing and vetting a number of different manufacturing ERP systems, some of which are being used today and have been being used for 10, 20 or more years. ProShop has always been a web-based platform. And so with Google Chrome, refresh forward and back, and the navigation with hyperlinks is something that people are used to. It's intuitive with that respect. And so ProShop, as you see in front of you, was always web-based and started as you see right there. Pro CNC was approached by one of their customers, and that customer said, "What are you using to manage your business?" and asked to buy the software that they used and developed themselves. And politely they said no, but after a few attempts, that customer of theirs was now buying their homegrown ERP software system. The end result, Pro CNC sold their machining business. You can see the building there in the background. And folks like Paul Van Meter and some of his partners, along with Brian Anderson and a few others, started ProShop and continued to develop the software starting about 6 years ago. Now, we're going to look at estimates. We'll touch on briefly the customer PO, what we call a quote, the part module, and the work order module this morning. ProShop is a manufacturing ecosystem of an ERP, MES, and QMS system. So the quality manual, for example, and all of the quality procedures of using ProShop as a software is all intertwined together. And without rambling through everything we see on our screen, like I said, we're going to start with estimates this morning. We'll talk about a different subject on our next webinar in Q1 of 2021. And with that said, here's a few takeaways from what I've heard customers tell me, how they benefit from the software, existing users, and some people that are currently evaluating the software. Two or three of the key points in here is that tribal information, it can be captured, and that information is all in one place with part and drawing revisions and a paperless system where all the information is current, because in essence, we're not keeping a job traveler writing down information that could be outdated by the end of the shift. ProShop also is a system where we can manage all the way down to how many end mills you'll use for a particular work order, and do you have enough based on the forecast of how many are needed. This system, like the title of the webinar says, will allow you to accurately produce estimates that can lead to more profitable work. And so before we get into the live demo, this is one slide that I asked Brian to share with us for this morning that they made up. In today's time, that work in ProShop can be done either remotely or in the shop. But truth be told, 80% of that work, because ProShop is a system that is traditionally cloud-based, can be done remotely. And estimating is obviously one of those modules. We thought it was worth mentioning that ProShop can be integrated with a number of other software platforms. One common question is does ProShop have a general ledger or accounting system? And users of ProShop will either traditionally use Sage or QuickBooks for that. A number of you on the call have a Mastercam seat or more, and or use SolidWorks. So there are additional integrations with those engineering platforms. HiIQ for bubble tagging, and then Inspect for inspections, obviously. When it comes to working with ShopWare and ProShop for evaluation or implementation, a few key things to touch on is that implementation could take up to 8 weeks. You do get an implementation specialist, which Brian Anderson is or has been in the past, that can share some of that experience. On-site and remote training is available. It's very common that we'll use import tools for data migration and configuration of the organization itself, customer lists, things like that. ProShop can be cloud-based or on-premise, a subscription or purchase. And lastly, one of the types of questions that we'll get is what do the workstations look like, and what hardware do I need? So that's also a discussion topic that is regular and that we could help answer at a future point in time if needed. For the sake of just having the right terminology in place, I wanted to share with everybody what the workflow is in ProShop. In ProShop, an estimate, sometimes folks will call that a quote. In ProShop, an estimate is an internal document. There is also a quote, which is customer facing, which summarizes that estimate, and we can apply a customer purchase order towards. Once that customer purchase order is received, an estimate is converted into a part. That part, let's say, is a living and breathing document, if you will. And that work order that's created from it is a snapshot in time against that customer's purchase order. So with that said, the ProShop is, again, a web-based platform. We recommend Google Chrome. And when we're logging into the system, we'll end up at our home screen here, our system home screen, where we have a variety of metrics, quality policy, and other terminology or goals and values of the company that you'd wish to have at this point. The production home screen is what we see here. And we're going to jump in the estimates module here in a second. But I thought it was worth pointing out that we have a number of custom links, tools, tracking, jump tos, and even for work that I am a work order planner or project manager for, that information can be summarized and put right here in front of us. When anybody does log into ProShop, the time clock punch feature is up in the upper right-hand corner. I've clocked in. And for payroll purposes, that's what that feature's for. If we actually had a work order that I was going to clock into, for example, and we had that work order, that's done right below there. So in this case, we're going to show the estimate instead of running a job and logging in. In the estimate section, essentially we can create an estimate 3 different ways. We can start from scratch, we can copy an existing estimate, or we can use a template. And so we see over here a few items. We have a variety of templates. And although this is a demo system, we can offer up some templates, and essentially we can see if we're vertical, if we're turning, horizontal, and even if we're 5-axis or assemblies, there's all sorts of different templates. We can also look for estimates by client or by customer. And so, for example, if we click on Premier Aerospace, we see all the different estimates that we've done in the past. And again, these can be copied and modified for any new work that a customer approaches us with. So in this case, we've prepared a demo estimate, and there's essentially 4 sections of any estimate. We have our header, we have all of our ops, we have what I like to call out-of-pocket costs, tooling, shipping, bar stock, outside processing. You know, anything outside of direct labor hourly rates, anything outside of the cost operated machine, and general overhead for the business. And at the bottom we have T's and C's that can be fairly self-explanatory. And so let's walk through each of these sections. The header section here tells us that our client is Spansky Aerospace. We have an estimate ID that has their client number, 4-digit number, their part number that I've made as a demo, obviously, and a host of other pieces of information. This estimate's due tomorrow. We can assign project managers and programmers also at this point. So for instance, Brian, who's on the call with us here, if this estimate is ultimately converted to a part in a work order inside ProShop's messaging system, Brian and Kelsey will both get alerts that this job has been received and is now in our scheduling system. Sean is our main contact. We have a few different types of parts and other fields here for miscellaneous information, maybe some pricing notes on how it's been priced in the past, and a way to, again, capture tribal information and share that with the rest of the organization in one place. Also in the headers, where we're going to capture what our bar stock is in this case. We can also capture with outside processing. Moving on to the second section of the estimate, we have all of our operations. So this is really where the granularity is of what allows you as a machine shop owner, machine operator, or manager be able to create an accurate estimate and have more profitable work. What we can see here at first glance is our internal operations, outside processing, we jump to Op 1000, final inspection, and the operation descriptions and types that go along with each of those. To touch on a few of these columns individually, what we have here is the ability to input how much time it takes for each of these operations. And so set up an obvious column or category for us. Next to that, what ProShop allows us to do with non-reoccurring setup is for the first time the job is ran. And now we can show this later if needed, but the non-recurring setup and that time can also be segmented away from the cost of the run of parts if it was done for a second, third, etc. The adder time is if we want to add time to any of the operations where, let's say, a newer employee is assigned to that resource or to that op, and let's say that person is in training, so to speak. So they're going to take extra time just because they're learning along the way, but we don't want to charge the customer for that. So we can also account for time there. You can see that further down we have the minutes per part. Again, that's estimated. We have time inputted for breakdown. We also have the option of putting time in for the cycle time of the part in the machine and load unload. So for example, if you had robotic loading unloading and you wanted to segment that away from the actual time that the part is the cycle start and when the part is either unloaded or ejected, that can also be done. You see a column for non-recurring inspection. Inspection could be done at each shop. You can see in this case that we've taken that and have a few different ops for incoming and final inspection. And so there's two different ways to account for inspection. In this case, we've segmented out by op instead of doing it every stage. And lastly, at the far left, we also have the opportunity for non-recurring material and hardware costs. In a few minutes, we'll go into edit mode, and I can show you how we can change, add, or remove some of this information. Thirdly, out-of-pocket costs, such as our bar stock tooling, shipping, and outside processing. And in here, what you can see is we have the ability to mark that up outside of the way that we mark up the entire job or estimate at the very end. And so we have 10% in for this bar stock here, this 3" by 4". This is also where we can account for scrap rate, and you can have it by part or by percentage. In this case, you can see that the number in parentheses will be the total number of parts, and that accounts directly to what we have for our scrap rate. T's and C's, you can see in this case we have a template where we're not going to use 4 of them, but we have 7 check marks. Within the ProShop system, we have a checkout box, and think of that as how we'll edit any estimate. So in this case, we'll run through again the header here really quick. We have a list of people. In this case, I picked Brian just to pick on him because he's on the call. Kelsey I selected here, and that's how you get the messaging alert system tied back in with the estimate when it goes to a work order. Part class can be changed, And obviously we have different contacts at the customer. If there's other estimates that we'd like to look back to, we can actually input a hyperlink here. And so after we save any editing, we can click on that and actually look back at other estimates just with one click, as opposed to cutting and pasting and typing in a long estimate number, if you will. The two other important sections of the header area is the part stock and the outside processing. So here we have the ability to pick material, the grade. So if we were stainless, we'd pick one of these 3 or 4, right? The dimensions and tolerances. What type do we have? In this case, we're doing rectangular. The length, some additional notes here. You can put anything in this field. And then what's the price of that? Each. Right here, and it's common in ProShop throughout. For example, material certs, in this case, a quote from your material supplier. So if you had a PDF quote from Alro Steel or Ryerson or Central Steel and Wire, you could add that right here, and that document is put in a directory that ProShop creates for you on the cloud or on your server if that's where you want the information to be stored. Looking down to our outside processing, additional click to unravel that information. Again, checkout, meaning we can edit what we have here. In this case, we're going to anodize this aluminum. If we had steel, we wanted to heat treat. We have other categories here that we can select. What type of spec do we have here? And again, these can all be put in. If you were to implement ProShop, these can be put in and customized for your business and for your suppliers. In this case, it's Apex. We have 10 days and $3 per part. So we'll exit out of there. I'm just going to close this box off. Within the ops section of the estimate, now you can see where you can put in any number you want, you can edit, you can change. In this case, what I've put in here recently is that I added an op 80. We're going to have the cost burden of an N16 mini Mitsubishi, but the reality of this tapping is that it's going to be held in the vise. So the setup for that is certainly not going to be 30 minutes, it'll be 5. Breakdown, let's say it's 5, just to have a number there. It still takes 8 minutes, but in this case, that'll be more accurate because of how the topping operation is actually going to be held. If we wanted to remove or move any of these, we have these 3 lines, and we also have the red X. So in this web-based system, if we just hover the cursor over to the far right, we can see what options we have to manipulate the sequence. If we wanted to add an additional operation, we have our lists here that are pre-filled. And so if we have an additional manual mill, we could call that op 90. Input all of these. We'll just put 30s in for the sake of time here. And this is going to be 5 minutes. Op 90 will go up here. And then when we hit save, that'll now be in the estimate. In a few minutes here, Brian is going to join with the demo and is going to explain how all of these minutes that we've been putting in directly relate to the actual cost, the gross, the net, and the profit for this particular estimate. So we will get to that here in a few minutes. With what I'm calling out-of-pocket costs, right? The bar stock, the tooling, shipping, and outside processing. This is where you set the scrap rate, the additional markup on these. We can add in shipping right here if we wanted, tooling costs, and here's where we could add additional quantities. When a customer PO is actually received, we select which quantity we want to create a work order for, but for the sake of what we'll calculate and what we'll show to the customer will be a few different quantities, and that pricing will be different. And lastly, like we showed before, we had 4 of these guys that weren't checked off and 7 that were, so I've checked them all. I'm going to hit Save Changes. You can see that now Op 90 is in here. It should be down 1, my mistake. And the times that we put in are shown here. We also have all the T's and C's calculated or in the system. I'm gonna remove this because Brian is going to be working off a this estimate here, and there we go. So now that's removed. Lastly, we have a few different subcategories up here. Part folder, process development. So for instance, if we had a lot of notes on how we did this type of job before, maybe who the customer's customer is, the background, and perhaps the how-to on what's needed that we don't have yet to be able to implement and do this work order. Where we're going to go next is into the cost breakdown, and this will have a number of fields and rows that Brian will explain to us, and it's basically going to be a jumping off point where all these minutes are applied to the actual hourly rate of all our equipment, our labor, and our overhead.
Thank you, Max. Thanks, Matt. I'd just like to just kind of build on what Max said about the QMS and getting certified, if that's something that you do, and keeping certified. Certainly, what we found is a lot of the reason that people have trouble being recertified is that it's difficult for them to maintain the system and follow the quality manual and the quality procedures they've set forth. So with ProShop, we spent a lot of time focusing on how to make following the processes you've developed actually attainable and easy, and then also easy to change in that manner. So we've got a lot of tools in place to make that system not only easy to get up and running and get certified, but easy to maintain and adapt as you change your business. Okay, so I'd like to know, can you guys see my screen? I'm not sure if that went through or not.
Yeah, it looks good, Brian.
Okay, you can see the estimate then?
Yep.
Okay, great, perfect. Okay, so as Max said, we'll take a look at the cost breakdown, and the cost breakdown takes all the information that you've entered in on this page or any other sub page, and it'll build a cost for us. As we take a look and open that up. Now, I like to think of estimates as a big cost calculator. This is what the purpose of this record is to build a cost so we can price it and send it on a quote to our customer. There's a lot of different ways that you can configure this system. The one we're looking at today is a fairly standard way of doing it. We take all of the time that's been entered in on the timetable on each of the operations for setup, for programming, for production running time, inspection, or whatever, and we'll add a direct labor rate to that. This is, like I said, kind of a standard way of doing this, where you can have production and setup rates at a specific, in this case, $25 an hour rate. Your programming time can be higher, inspection time can be higher, anything that you settle on. It will take all of this direct labor cost and associate it with the times that we've put in at the other table. And you'll notice, in this case, we're quoting 2 different quantities. We're quoting a quantity of 500, 506 accounting for scrap, and a quantity of 1,000. And we have 2 separate sets of columns. The first set is going to show us the first time run with including all of the NR times, the non-recurring time that we would be putting in. So that's why when we look at our setup fields, we have a higher number. Then when we look at our next set of columns, the repeat columns, it's a lower number, because the second or third or fourth time that we do this, it should take us less time to set up the job. So all of that is accounted here with these two sets of columns. We move down below, we get some simple roll up of what the costs are, what our direct labor costs are, etc. And all of that will be plugged into per part pricing based on the different activities that we're doing. And you can see all that information here. The next thing we want to do is we're going to add overhead to these numbers. So we know that we're going to spend, in this case, for the first run of 500 parts, we're going to spend about 390 hours on labor on this. So we'll apply an overhead rate to cover all the other things that aren't direct labor. So, you know, whether that's my rent and power bill, my insurance costs, whatever it might be, all of that's going to be applied in this row here. And that number comes from what we set down here. This number, along with any of the other numbers that I'm looking at, can be completely customized and set per record. And what I mean by that is, you'll go through ProShop and you'll set configurations to default the system to a specific number. But for every single estimate that you create, you can change these. So if you have a job that runs through a high overhead portion of the business, you can have your templates preset, you can have all of your estimates that are going to run through that portion of the business at a high overhead rate. And then you can have a separate set of estimates and templates and whatnot that maybe run through a more manual process, a lower overhead process, and you can have those set as well to a different rate. And you can adjust each estimate individually if you're trying to kind of zero in on the cost and really see what things are going to take you to produce and manufacture. We'll get a summary of our labor and overhead costs here. And the next section, we'll move in to add all of our out-of-pocket costs. So in this case, our out-of-pocket costs in the upper portion of the table are going to be our raw material costs. They're going to be our external processing costs, anodizing or what have you. And the lower portion of the table will be adding in bill of materials. So in today's example, for the sake of time, we didn't dive into bill of materials, but we do have the ability to add bill of material items, any inventory items. If you choose to inventory material, for example, you can do that. It can pull pricing in from your inventory tables and add all of that in right here. So again, raw materials, hardware items, anything that you decide that you need to inventory, all of that can be logged and then referenced quickly and easily through this process. We'll get our total costs, and then we move into our profit section. So our profit section is going to essentially evaluate all of the costs above. It's going to evaluate what we spent, even with adder time. We can see that this bottom row here shows that we're accounting for adder time. So if we've added, as Max mentioned, any additional time that we're going to spend on the job that we're not going to charge the customer, all of that's going to be evaluated when we come up with this number. If I want to edit any of these things, if I don't like what I'm doing or what I'm seeing here, I can change things like my base profit markup. I don't change my calculations in real time. I can change my overhead number. I can change all of my multipliers up here. Anything that I need to be able to watch this calculator move and change, give me the pricing that I want, which is my lower section here. So if I'm looking at first run pricing and I'm looking at my per piece price on the first run, these two fields are going to show that for me on the first run. These two fields are going to show me the repeat pricing without all of that first run additional cost in. And then if I want to, I can choose to have the NRE as a separate line item on the quote as I send it to the customer. All right, I'm not going to bother saving this. Okay, so once we have gone through all of our costs, we've associated any additional changes that we've wanted to make to get our pricing structure correct, and we're happy with this, we can go ahead and create a quote. Now in this case, Max has already created one. Creating a quote is literally as simple as choosing which option you want. Do you want the NRE rolled into the unit cost? Do you want it as a separate line item? And you just click the button and that creates the quote. In this case, I want to actually save this. I'll just go back and we'll take a look at the quote that's already been created. So that's another common question we get is, how do I see my historical quote data? On this page, this field on the right-hand side will show me all of the quotes for the part. So we only have the one today, but I'll be able to see my historical pricing data and a link directly to any quote that I've ever created. When I take a look here, this is that form. This is going back to that terminology that we use. That's a little bit different from maybe some of the other terms that you're used to using, but this is the quote that we're going to send to our customer. It comes with all the information preset. We just need to add in our delivery timeline, or you can put in 12 weeks ARO or what have you. It'll accept either. When we want to print this off, we can print this as a PDF, send it to the, email it to our customer, what have you. All of our terms and conditions are there. Everything that we need should be here for the customer to get their pricing. Similar to when you move from the estimate to the quote phase, we're going to be able to take this and we're going to be able to leverage all the information that we've put into production. So once we're past that quoting phase and we actually win the job, hopefully we've done a good job with that, we'll be able to take all of this and turn it into a purchase order. Again, it's the same sort of a thing, just a single click to go to a purchase order. Now we've already done that in this one, so I'm going to go right to that. And we'll see all of our information will flow through. We'll get our pricing in, our delivery dates will come through for us. And this is where ProShop is going to start associating actual production records with this project. So we'll be able to have a part record, which looks suspiciously like an estimate, but it's going to differ from an estimate in the terms that an estimate is really that cost calculator. That's going to be where we put all that information in to build that cost. A part record, on the other hand, is going to be our living, breathing manufacturing plan. All the documents that we need, work instruction, inspection planning, all of that stuff lives here at this part record. It's also similar to an estimate. It's going to have an entire history of what we call our work orders. So the work order is like a job traveler. The history of what did they order, when was it due, how much did we sell it for each one. So again, very similar to how the estimates work, but this is after winning the job and then keeping track of it over time. We're also going to be able to associate all of the individual records that we use for the part. So when we have our customer original records, we can link those together. So we can have quick access to the individual records that we might need for running this job. We can link in what we call approved prints. So in addition to having a quick link for the customer supplied files, we can reference what we're going to have internally as an approved print for inspection purposes, etc. We're going to also use this to create those work orders as we move through. Creating a work order is very simple. If I just click the button, I'll get this work order created for me. I'll go ahead and do this one. All of my data pre-filled, everything that I need, everything that's been preset, it's all there. So I can just do this and it'll create my work order. This is the job traveler. Interesting thing is when this happens, there's a couple of things that are happening in the background that I like to mention. We won't dive into them today, but this job is automatically placed on the schedule for any scheduled resource. So in this case, my N16, my mini mitts for my vertical machining center, that's going to be automatically placed on the Gantt chart on the schedule for that machine. I'm going to get a system message, as is Kelsey, for this job. So we have a messaging system that's built in. I've been notified that I'm project manager for a job that's just been created. And it's going to give me a link right back to that. So I've got instant notifications for new work that's coming in. When I come back over to here, I'm going to take a look at my first run job. We'll see a couple key things that are here. So first of all, this popped up with a message saying there's a new approved print since the last time I viewed this work order. That's great. So there, right there, as we talk about inspection planning, the different things that we need to provide for our team, we're going to be able to do that here and control those and notify everybody anytime that there's a change. So it's telling me there's a new revision. I can see that revision here with the red flags. If I want to look at the new print, I just click on that link. that opens that up for me, and I'll be able to see that for my inspection plan. I can see my purchasing icons here. So, and they're color coded, so I can tell from this aspect that the raw material has been queued for purchasing, and it's been requested to arrive on the 18th. This will be over on the purchasing dashboard. Again, we're not going to get into that level of things today, but then once the purchasing agent does their job, they place the order, this will change to a link to that purchase order, as well as my color coding will go from blue to yellow. And then when the receiving team does their bid, it'll go from yellow to green. So I have instant visuals on whether or not I can actually perform what I need to do, set the job up and run it, all that kind of stuff. Cutting tool lists, all that is here as well. If I wanted to take a look at that, this is my cutting tool list. And again, Max had mentioned an integration with Mastercam. So there's some flexibility in how you can populate these lists from G-code or what have you, and sync the tool library to Mastercam. If I wanted to look at an individual tool, I can look at an individual tool, see what the tool is, where do I buy it, how many I have in inventory, etc. And so on and so forth down the list. As we move through this, I'll just kind of mention real quickly, we've got different color codes here to tell you what the planning status is of any of the individual job or operations. So I can see that my operation 50 first manufacturing operation is green. It's set as 1, 2, 3, 4, meaning that all of the work is done. This would be ready to go to machine. This one is through programming. This one is through inspection planning, and then just initial planning subsequently. So you have a lot of visibility options to be able to track these things and see. And these color codes will also display on that schedule. So when I'm looking at the mini MITs for Ops 50, I would be able to see that would be green. So I get a visual saying that that's actually ready for the machine. And that's all driven from this page. So I think that'll about, kind of wrap it up for what I wanted to cover with this short time. I don't know, Max, do we want to go with questions or anything like that at this point?
Yeah, thanks, Brian. If anybody has any questions related to estimates, work orders, or parts, we still have a number of attendees that are online and viewing. Now would be a great time for either Brian or I to field those. And Brian, I think you're still driving there, and it can be one of those that will answer it by showing you, in addition to telling you how it's done.
Yeah. As you guys are thinking about any of the questions that you have, I wanted to kind of loop back around to when Max was talking about the implementation process. One of the things that's very challenging and very difficult is actually adopting any new system. And it doesn't matter if it's an ERP, it doesn't matter if it's a programming software or even an email software. It's a change, and it takes time and it takes effort. So when we look at implementation, what we do is we connect you with an implementation specialist that will walk you through the entire process. Usually for most of our customers, usually that's about a 30-hour process over the course of 6 to 8 weeks, or 2 to 3 months, depending on how much time that you have to actually spend on the training on your own, because there is definitely some self-directed training that we include as well. But the goal is to get you using the software in the way that your business needs to use it. So not only are we going to train you how the software works, we're going to show you what the best method of using the software is for your company. Talk about the estimates and talk about the templates for setting up these estimates. What's the best way to set those up to represent the kind of work that you do? So when you look at an estimate, you could, or a new project rather, you could go to an estimate, go to a template, and you can create a new pricing within hopefully 10, 15, 30 minutes for a big job, because we want that process to be very fast so you can quote more work, you can hopefully get the pricing right, and then you can win that work and get it in your shop. That's really what we focus a lot on in the implementation process, is going through, and not just the estimating area, any of the areas in ProShop, to make sure that you're able to utilize them to the way that it best fits your company. And we take that really seriously, because that's where a lot of system implementation fails, again, it doesn't matter what kind of system we're talking about, but we've recognized that and we want to make sure that we do whatever we can to make you successful adopting ProShop. That's very important to us.
Brian, a question that came up was about how this relates to scheduling. And we've talked about the must leave by date in the past. And we also have information and an estimate as to how long the outside processing will take. Can you speak a little bit to how the not the time information in each op, but the time and days for outside processing and other facets of the work, and how that weaves in with the current schedule for the shop?
Sure. Yeah. So as we look at a work order, our delivery date, our due date to the customers is driven directly off of the purchase order. So this date, if I open this page up for editing, you'll be able to see that I can't change this date. That's only changed through one place. So when it gets changed on the PO, that pulls through to the work order, pulls through to the schedules, system messages, the whole works. The days to ship is how many days does it take to get from me to my customer, standard days. And I can adjust this if I've got a customer on the other side of the country and it normally takes 4 or 5 days, but I decide I'm going to ship something red, I can come to this work order individually and change it. So that would be something that is factored in. We also have the must leave by date. And this date is calculated to include days to ship, as well as our outside processing. So I'm going to go ahead and go in, take a look at our outside processing, and we'll see here that I've got 10 days plugged in for outside processing. That's business days. This timeline will include the transit time to and from my anodizer. So when the system is calculating that must leave by date, it's going to take that 10 days into account. It's going to take my standard shipping timeline into account and calculate this must leave by date for me. This is what's going to drive the schedule to show me if I am on time or not. Let me just kind of open that up here. See if I can pull up a good example. I don't have a good example on this exact work order that we were working on because I haven't looked at the schedule. But in this case, on this example of the Gantt chart, what we see is on this particular machine, this 5AX, I've got a lot of things going on here. It looks like I got to do a little bit of cleanup, but on the left-hand side, I'll see, again, color codes about jobs that are on time or late. If they're on time, they're yellow. If they're late, they're pink. And these yellow marks that we see on the right side of the schedule, these are all of those pre-calculated must-leave by dates. The red marks are going to be the due at the customer date. And I also have another incidental mark here, an orange mark, that's going to show what we call a must be back on date. That's another level of planning that you can do for external processing. So that's an option, as well as if you want to actually plan milestone dates for outside processing, you can set those milestone dates in and they'll show up as an orange mark on the schedule. The color code, i.e. on time, is driven on the left, is driven by these yellow dates. So if the job, like we see here, this job is finishing before it's yellow time, that'll be yellow here because it's on time. If it's going to be late, like this one is, it's finishing after, it's going to be pink. And that's going to be driving all of that. And it's live too. So as I make changes to any of those things, those changes will automatically flow through to the individual job. So if I come in here and if I wanted to change the delivery date of this particular item, let's see, it's 263. So I'll change the delivery date here and just say it's going to be on the 28th. And I'll go ahead and change this one as well. When I come back to the schedule and I reload this, we'll see that has updated in real time. And that goes the same for any of the other things, any of the other attributes that I may be changing along the way, not just that final delivery date. So all of that will be live against this Gantt chart scheduling. Did that answer that question okay?
Yeah, I appreciate it, Brian. Another question that came up related to revisions, part revisions. How do we handle a revision to a part, for example, after an estimate is created?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let me jump back over here and talk about that for just a minute. So as we take a look at this. We'll have, I created a second work order for this job that we were looking at from the estimating perspective. Once we win the job, if a revision change comes through, you have to make a decision about whether or not you need to re-estimate that part. And if you want to re-estimate it, no problem. You can go back in here. You can choose to re-estimate and archive the original estimate and then make your changes. But a lot of times the change is small enough that you simply won't include any pricing change. You'll just accept the fact, oh, they've changed the size of a hole. Really, all that's doing is 5 or 10 minutes of planning or programming time to change the size of a hole, whatever it might be. In those cases, that's handled in a much more simple process because you don't have to go through any estimate changes and pricing changes. And what we'll do is I'll actually come in here to this purchase order itself, and I'll change this revision. And maybe I'm going to go from revision C to D. I'll change this, and maybe I'll just change everything here to D. As I do that, again, I get the flags that say that this revision has changed. Anyone that is supposed to get my my change will get the automated system messages for that with a link right to that work order. I can see that this work order no longer has an approved print, but when I go to my part level and I take a look at my list of work orders for this, my original work order still has the green for Rev C, it still has the approved print that's linked in, etc. When it's time to update this, there's a handful of different ways that you can handle this. If you have 2 active work orders in the system at a time, it's a little bit more, it's not complicated, it's just direct about how you decide you want to do that. So again, different processes that are involved. You can absolutely have 2 separate revisions active and live in the system at the same time. The technique just changes. If I only had 1, the process is fairly simple. I would go in and I would change and update my inspection plan, which would be living here in the part record. I would update that, and then I would simply come in and provide a new print and link it in. Let me just do this real quick. I would link in a new print here, and I'll just pull in my print like this, save that, and when I come back over to here, you'll see that I've updated my revision. Now both revisions are green. They'll both actually have independent records associated with them, and that'll be linked in. Of course, I just attached the same print as before, but there are separate files, and they're all controlled under this part folder. Every single part record that's in the system gets this part folder, and as if I open that, you'll see that there's an approved print folder there, and it's got my most current active as well as all of my archives. All of that is maintained through the front end interface of ProShop. So you don't actually have to go in here and change anything. All of this is managed through ProShop.
Thank you for attending and your time with us, and we'll talk to you later.
All right, thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Matt.